I have buried 3 men, a wife, and a horse I loved better than most people, and I never once cried doing it. I tell you that not to sound hard, but so you understand the kind of man stood on that trail the morning everything changed. A man with the soft worn clean off him. A man who decided somewhere back down the years that caring was just a longer road to grief. So when I tell you a child broke me open, I need you to know what there was to break. You'll want to know how a girl ended up alone on the Calico Trail with a dead mule and her shoes worn through to the bone. You'll want to know why I didn't just ride past, the way a sensible man would. And you'll want to know the thing I've never told a living soul, the choice I made halfway up that mountain, the one I'd take back if I could, and the one I'd make again 100 times over. Stay with me. This is the story of how the loneliest man in the territory got himself a daughter he never asked for, and what it cost the both of us to keep her. It starts with a sound I thought was a hurt animal. It wasn't. The sound came up the draw before I saw anything to make it. A thin, ragged thing, rising and falling, the way a rabbit screams in a snare, and I'll be honest with you, my first thought was meat. I'd been 4 days from the nearest town with nothing in my saddlebag but jerky gone hard as a saddle horn and a half-sack of coffee, and a man gets practical about hunger. I slid the rifle from its scabbard slow, walked old Brick forward with my knees and listened. The wind off the calicos that time of year comes down cold even in summer, carries the smell of sage and dust, and somewhere underneath, the mineral tang of the high snow that never quite melts. I remember all of it. I remember the way Brick's ears swiveled and pinned, the way he didn't want to go forward, and how I made him anyway because I am a stubborn old fool and always have been. We came around the shoulder of Red Rock, and there it was. A mule, dead maybe a day, swollen and stiff-legged in the trail with the flies already busy at its eyes. And folded up against the warm wall of it, half in shadow, was the smallest person I had ever seen draw breath. She couldn't have been more than 7. Hard to say, hunger makes children smaller and older both at once. She had a face like a bird's egg, pale and freckled and cracked at the lips, and a tangle of dark hair that hadn't met a comb in a long while. She'd been crying. That was the sound. Not a hurt animal. A hurt child, which is the same sound exactly, and I have never been able to unhear that since. She saw me and went silent so fast it was like a door slamming. I have to tell you what I noticed, because it's the kind of thing that follows a man. She didn't reach for me. A child that small, that alone, that wrecked, you'd think she'd reach. Instead, she pressed herself back against the dead mule and got smaller, and her hand went down to the dirt and closed around a rock the size of a hen's egg, and she held it like it was the only true thing in the world. That's a child who's learned that grown men are weather, something to survive, not something to run toward. I stopped Brick a good ways off and got down slow, the way you do with a green colt. I left the rifle on the saddle. I crouched in the trail with my hat in my hands, which I don't know why I did except that something in me understood it would be wrong to be tall in front of her right then. "That your mule," I said, stupid thing to say, first words I ever spoke to her. She didn't answer. Her eyes went from my face to my hands to the rifle on the saddle and back, fast as a sparrow taking inventory, sizing the threat. I have seen scouts do it, and old soldiers, and that little girl did it the same way, and it put a cold finger right down my spine. "My name's Asa," I said. "Asa Coyle. I run a few cows over the next ridge when they'll let me. I got coffee and I got jerky and the jerky's terrible." I held up the sack. "You're welcome to fight me for it." Nothing the rock in her fist, the flies, the wind. I am not a patient man. Ask anyone who knew me and they'll tell you Asa Coyle would sooner argue than eat. But something about her made patience easy, the way you go still and quiet when you find a deer close. I just stayed crouched there and let the silence be, and I looked at the mule instead of at her so she didn't have to feel my eyes. There was a pack on the mule, or had been. It had been gone through. Not by her, the knots were cut clean by a man's knife, and the good things were missing. No food, no bedroll, no canteen. Whoever had been with this child had stripped the animal of everything that would keep a person alive and left her with a corpse and a rock. I felt the old anger come up in me then, hot and useless. I have spent a lot of my life angry at men I'll never get to settle with. "Somebody leave you," I said, soft as I could make it. And she spoke, first time. Her voice was a rasp dried out barely there. "He said he'd come back." 3 words. I've turned them over 10,000 times since. He said he'd come back, not crying when she said it, worse than crying. She said it the way you'd report the weather, the way you'd say it'll likely rain. She'd already done her grieving for whoever he was. She'd done it out here alone against a dead mule, and what was left in her was just the dry fact of it. "How long ago?" I said. She thought about it. Children that age don't always have the days lined up. 3 sleeps, she said. Maybe. 3 days. A child of 7, alone, 3 days on the Calico Trail, no water but what she could have licked off the rocks at dawn, no food, a corpse going right beside her in the heat, and she had not left. She had not wandered off and died in a wash somewhere, which is what should have happened, what happens to grown men out here. She had stayed exactly where he told her to stay, because he said he'd come back, and some part of her was still keeping faith with a man who had cut the food off a mule and ridden away from his own child. I want you to understand that I knew, right then, kneeling in that dust, that he wasn't coming back, and I knew she didn't believe me even though I hadn't said it yet. And I understood that the cruelest thing in the whole desert that morning wasn't the sun or the distance. It was hope. She was being eaten alive by hope, and there wasn't a thing I could do to fix that one. "I'm going to get my canteen," I said. "I'm going to walk to my horse and walk back slow, and you're going to watch me the whole way, and you're going to see I don't do anything but get water. All right." She didn't say all right, but she watched me. The rock stayed in her fist. I got the canteen, came back slow, set it down in the dirt halfway between us, and backed off. I'd learned that with the wild dogs that used to come around my line camp. You don't hand a starved thing food. You put it down and you make yourself small and you let it decide. Took her a long minute. Then she lunged, snatched the canteen, scrambled back, and drank like the world was ending. Water ran down her chin and made clean tracks through the dirt on her neck, and I had to look at the mountains for a second. She drank too fast and brought some of it back up, and that scared her, I think, the waste of it, because she clamped a hand over her own mouth like she could shove it back in. I told her, "Easy now, easy, there's plenty. That's the whole point of a canteen, you can have all of it." She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign tongue. Like plenty was a word she'd heard of but never been issued. I gave her the worst jerky in the territory, and she ate it like communion. While she ate, I did some figuring. I'm not a soft man, I told you that, and I want to be honest about the cowardice in me too. Because the sensible thing, the thing that wouldn't upend my whole quiet, ruined life, was to take her to the nearest town, that was Bishop's Cross, 2 days back the way I'd come, and hand her to the church women and ride on and tell myself I'd done right. That was the plan. I'll have you know that was the plan for about an hour. It started to come apart when I lifted her onto brick. She let me. That surprised me. After the rock, after all that flinching, she let a strange man put his hands on her and set her up on a horse. And as I lifted her, I felt how light she was, how there was nothing to her, just sticks and breath and that fierce held in fear. And her one little hand came up without her thinking about it and grabbed a fistful of my collar. Not the rock, my collar, holding on. A body remembers how to be held even when the mind has decided not to trust anybody. Her body grabbed me before her mind could stop it, and then I felt her go stiff, felt her catch herself and make herself let go, sit up straight and alone like she'd taught herself to, and that was the thing. That's where the plan died, the grabbing and the letting go. A child should not have to teach herself not to hold on. "What's your name?" I asked her, swinging up behind. Long quiet. Brick stamped. The dead mule sighed out gas in the heat, a sound that made her flinch hard against me and then pull away again. Ren, she said finally, then fierce like it cost her. He named me Ren, my pa. My pa, so that's who left her. I'd hoped, that it was an uncle, a stranger, some hired man, anybody but the one person a child's whole sky is built on. But no. Her own father had stripped the mule and ridden off a man's 3 days into nowhere and left his little Ren holding a rock in his promise, and she was still defending him with the only fierceness she had left. He named me. Like that proved something. Like that was love she could hold up against the evidence. I have known hard men and I have known cruel men and I have, God forgive me, been both at different times. But I want to find Ren's father in whatever country he's in, and I want to ask him one question. Just one. I want to ask him what he told himself, riding away. I want to know the lie a man tells himself to do that. Because there is a lie. There's always a lie that lets a man do the worst thing. And I would like to know what it was so I can be sure I never tell it to myself. We didn't go to Bishop's Cross. I told myself it was the distance, the heat, that she was too weak for 2 more days in the saddle, and there was truth in that. But the bigger truth was simpler and harder, and I knew it even then, with her thin back stiff against my chest and her trying so hard not to lean on me. I was not going to hand this child to a stranger. I had handed enough things over to strangers in my life. Caskets, mostly. I was not going to hand over a living, warm thing that had grabbed my collar without meaning to. So I turned brick toward home, toward my ridge, toward the ruined, quiet life I'd made out there with my cows and my ghosts, and I felt the whole shape of that life change with the turning, felt it the way you feel weather coming in your bad knee. We hadn't gone a mile before she fell asleep. Just went out mid-flinch, her body finally surrendering past the reach of her fear, slumped back into me dead asleep. And her hand, that little hand in her sleep, found my collar again and held on, and this time her mind wasn't awake to make her stop. I rode the rest of that afternoon barely moving so as not to wake her. My arm went asleep. My back set up like a fence post. I didn't shift her an inch. Somewhere up on the ridge a hawk went over, and I found myself doing a thing I hadn't done in years, a thing I'd have laughed at another man for. I was talking to my dead wife. Sarah, I said in my head, Sarah, look what I found. Look what somebody threw away. And I swear to you the wind came down off the snow and it was almost cool, almost like a hand, and I told myself that was just the elevation. I'll tell you the truth. I didn't know the first thing about raising a child. I didn't know what they ate or how they slept or what you said to one that had been hurt the way this one had. I knew cows and weather and grief most of all. But I knew about the held breath and the long watch. I knew about keeping faith with somebody who wasn't coming back. I'd been doing it for 6 years up on that ridge, keeping Sarah's faith, talking to a grave. Maybe that's why. Maybe a man who spent 6 years waiting on the dead is the right man to find a child waiting on the gone. Maybe we recognized each other, the two of us, the way 2 people with the same limp will catch each other's eye across a room. That night I made a fire and a broth from the last of the jerky and a wild onion, and I fed it to her a spoon at a time when she woke, and she watched me over the rim of the cup with eyes that didn't trust the broth wouldn't be taken away. And when she finished it, she didn't say thank you. She said, "You're going to leave too, everybody does, so you can just do it now if you want." She said it to get it over with. She said it so the leaving would be on her terms, just once, so one time in her life she'd be the one who knew it was coming. And I want to tell you I had some wise, gentle thing to say. I didn't. I'm not built that way. I just looked at her across that little fire, this hard old widower and this thrown-away child, and I said the only true thing I had. "I'm too old and too stubborn to start someplace new," I said, "and I already buried everybody I was going to leave. You're stuck with me, Ren. I'm sorry about it. I'd have picked somebody nicer for you if I'd been asked." She didn't smile. It was too early for that. We were weeks from the first time I'd see her smile, and that's a whole other story. But she put the rock down. She'd been holding it that whole time. Through the ride, through the broth, asleep even, I'd felt it against my ribs, the rock from the trail. The only true thing in the world. And there by my fire she set it down in the dirt, careful, like she might want it back. And she pulled my spare blanket up to her chin, and she watched me until she couldn't any more. I sat up the whole night feeding that fire and watching her breathe. I didn't know yet about the men who'd come looking. I didn't know what her father had really done, or why somebody would want a 7-year-old girl bad enough to ride into my country with guns. I didn't know the choice I'd have to make on the mountain, the one I told you about, the one I still wake from sometimes. That night I just knew I had a child, and that I would not be handing her over. The rock's still on my mantle, by the way. After everything, I never let her throw it out. You'll understand why by the end. The first 3 weeks were the war I knew how to fight, keeping a small body alive. She would not eat in front of me, not really, not at first. She'd take what I gave and squirrel half of it away, and I'd find hard biscuit gone green tucked behind the woodbox, under her bedding, in the toes of the boots I'd cut down to fit her. I didn't say a word about it. I'd had a dog once after the war that buried food its whole life and died old and fat and never stopped burying it. Some hungers don't get talked out of you. They get outweighted. So every time I found a cache I left it be, and I made sure the next meal came, and the next, until somewhere in there her body started to believe what her mind wouldn't, that the food would keep coming, that the well had no bottom. I want to tell you about her hands, because that's where I watched her come back to life. When I found her, her hands were a fist and a flinch. By the second week they'd started to do things again. She took to following me at chores, not helping exactly, just orbiting, watching everything with that sparrow-quick attention. And one morning I was mending tack and I looked over and she'd got a strip of my spare latigo and was trying to copy the stitch, tongue between her teeth, fingers too small for it, getting it wrong and wrong and wrong and not quitting. Stubborn. Lord, she was stubborn. She'd have sat there till dark fighting that leather. I didn't help her. I want that on the record because it's the kindest thing I did that whole week. I didn't reach over and fix it. I let her get it wrong 40 times because I understood somehow that this child needed to do one thing all the way through by herself and have it be hers. When she finally got the stitch, she didn't whoop or look to me for praise. She just went still, looked at it, and then looked at me, one flick of the eyes to see if I'd seen. I'd seen. I nodded once. She went back to it. That was a whole conversation, that nod. We had a lot of those. We were neither of us much for talking. Two people who'd learned the hard way that words mostly come before somebody leaves. I learned her in pieces. She was afraid of the dark but more afraid of admitting it, so she'd lie rigid in the loft till I started by accident. I told myself, leaving a lamp turned low at the bottom of the ladder to find my way to the privy. She hummed when she thought she was alone. No tune I knew, something her mother must have given her before her mother became a thing we did not speak of. She could read a little. Her father had taught her that much, which complicated my hate for him in a way I resented, because a man who teaches his girl her letters and then leaves her to die is harder to hate clean than a plain monster, and I wanted very badly to hate him clean. And she kept watch on the trail, every day. She'd climb the big rock west of the cabin and sit and watch the trail down the draw, the one we'd come up, watching for him. He said he'd come back. I never told her to stop. What would I have said? Your father isn't coming, give up the one hope holding you together. No, I let her keep her watch. I'd bring her up a biscuit sometimes and sit with her and we'd watch the empty trail together. And I'd think my own thoughts about the empty trails in my own life. And we'd come down at dark and not say anything. It was on the big rock that she finally told me the rest of it. Took a month. She told it the way she told everything, flat like weather. Her mother had died of a fever in the winter. Her father had not been right after. They'd lost the place, they'd had debt, drink. She didn't have the words for it, but I could fill them in. They'd been heading west to a brother of his who might take them in, and somewhere in the crossing her father had started talking about how a man alone could find work, how a man with a child couldn't, how it'd be easier for everybody. He'd said it where she could hear, testing how it sounded maybe, working up to it. And then one morning he'd told her to wait by the mule. He'd scout the trail ahead. He'd be back before the sun was high. I counted, she told me, up on the rock looking at the trail. I'm good at counting. I counted to 1,004 times, that's how long he said, then I counted past it. She wasn't crying. I'm not mad, she said, which is the saddest sentence I have ever heard a child say. He had to, it's easier for everybody. I want to tell you what I did, because it's the realest thing in this whole story, and I'm not proud of how plain it was. I didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. She wouldn't have believed it, and it would have sounded like the thing you say. Instead, I picked up a rock, a regular rock, off the big rock we sat on, and I held it out to her, the twin of the one she'd carried in from the trail, the one on my mantle now. You know why you held onto that rock? I said. She shook her head. Because when everything's gone, a person needs one true thing to hold, I said. Doesn't matter that it's just a rock. It mattered that it was yours and it didn't leave. I closed her fingers around the new one. I'm a worse rock than that one. I'm old and I'm mean and I snore, but I'll tell you the one thing I can promise and have it be true. I'm not going to scout ahead. Whatever's coming, I'm going to be standing in front of it next to you. That's the whole promise. It's not a big one. But I've never broke one yet, and I'm too old to start. She looked at the rock in her hand a long time. Then she leaned into my side. First time. Not grabbing my collar in her sleep, awake, choosing it, leaning the small living weight of herself against a man on purpose. And we sat on that rock and watched the trail her father wasn't on, and the sun went down red over the calicos, and I learned that an old man's heart can break and mend in the same breath and somehow be bigger for the scar. I'd have told you that was the end of the hard part. I'd have been a fool. The hard part hadn't started. The first sign was Brick. He came in off the high pasture lathered and spooked one evening with a graze on his flank that wasn't from any branch. The second sign was 3 days later, boot tracks in the wash below the spring, 2 men, not mine, who'd watered there and not come up to the cabin to say so, which no honest traveler in that country would do. You announce yourself out here. You ride in and you take coffee and you trade the news. Men who water at your spring and don't come up are men who don't want their faces known. I started carrying the rifle to the privy. I started teaching Wren things I hated teaching a child. Where to go if I yelled. The cleft-over root cellar behind the cabin, the one with the false shelf, where I kept the few dollars I had and Sarah's wedding ring. How to be silent. How long to stay. I taught her like it was a game, and she learned like it wasn't, because she'd had practice being told to wait. And the awful grace of it was that the very skill her father's abandonment had carved into her, the stillness, the watching, the patience past 1,000 counted 4 times over, was the skill that might keep her alive now. They came on a gray morning with no wind. 2 of them riding easy like they had a right. I stepped out with the rifle down along my leg, not pointed, not hidden. Wren was in the cellar. The rock she'd carried was on the mantel. The new one I'd given her was in her pocket. I'd checked. A man notices what he's afraid to lose. The lead rider was lean, well-dressed for the country, the kind of clean that means a man's paid to do other men's ugly work. He smiled at me. I didn't like the smile. "Morning," he said. "Looking for a man named Tolliver, came through with a girl. Little thing, dark hair, you see anybody like that?" Tolliver, so that was her father's name. I filed it away in the cold part of my mind. "Lot of folks come through," I said. "This one owed a debt," the man said, still smiling. "A serious one to a serious party. He skipped on it and he took something didn't belong to him." His eyes went over my cabin, my pens, the smoke from my chimney that meant somebody'd cooked breakfast for more than one. "The girl, you understand. The party'd call the debt square for the girl. There's folks pay good money for a girl that age, broke and right. It's just business, friend. You hand over the Tolliver girl, there's money in it for you, and these old hills stay quiet. I have killed men. I told you that at the start so you'd believe me now. I have killed men in the war and after it, and I have never once enjoyed it. I want you to know that I considered, for about 1 second, just shooting him where he sat. It would have been simpler. There were two of them and one of me, but I had the cabin at my back and the high ground and the cold thing in me that the war put there and never took out. But there were two of them, and if I shot the first, the second might get to the cabin, might get to the cellar, and I had made a promise on a rock to a little girl that I would stand in front of whatever was coming, and standing in front of it does not mean trading my life for hers in a way that leaves her alone again with strange men. Standing in front of it meant being smart, which is harder than being brave, and I have never been good at it. So I smiled back. God help me, I matched his smile. "Tolliver," I said like I was remembering. "Tall fella, rode through 3 weeks back. Had a girl with him, yeah, headed up over the Calico Pass toward the Nevada side. Said he had a brother in Piotch. True, every word, except the man hadn't come through here and I'd never seen his face, but Wren had told me about the brother in Piotch, and the lie was strong because it had her truth inside it. Pushing hard, that one. 3 weeks gone, he'll be clean across the line by now." The clean man studied me. I let him. I'd been lying to harder customers than him since before he was weaned. I'd lied to my own heart for 6 years about being done with caring, and that's the hardest lie there is. "Piotch," he said. "Piotch," I agreed. "Brother's a freighter or some such. You'll want to move quick. Pass closes with the first snow, and that's any day now this high." It hung there. The whole world hung on whether a man believed a man. And then, and I will hear this sound till I die, there came a small noise from the cabin. Not the cellar, the cabin, a scrape, a foot on a board. She'd come up. She'd heard her father's name and the word brother and Piotch, and some piece of her, some piece that still kept the watch, still believed he said he'd come back. Some piece of her had crept up out of the safe dark to hear news of her father, and her foot had found the one board in my whole cabin that talks. The clean man's eyes moved to the door. "And this is the choice. This is the one I told you about. Right here, this second," with his eyes going to the door and his hand drifting toward his coat. I could keep lying, sell it harder. Maybe he doubts the noise, maybe it's the wind, maybe I get him riding for Piotch and we're saved clean. Or I bring up the rifle now, while his hand's still moving and not yet arrived, and I take the one true shot I'm sure of, and I deal with the second man with whatever God and a hot barrel allow. And there is every chance in that math that I am dead in 10 seconds and Wren is worse than dead. A breath less than a breath. I have made faster choices in my life and slower ones, and I have never made one that cost more, and I made it before I knew I'd made it, the way your hand pulls back from a stove before you feel the burn. I'm going to stop the part here. I know what I'm doing, leaving it here. His hand drifting and her foot on the board and my rifle down along my leg. But I told you at the start there was a choice on the mountain I'd take back if I could and make again 100 times over, and you can't understand a thing like that all at once. You have to sit in the second of it the way I had to. So sit in it, his hand, the door, the board that talks. I'll tell you what I did in the last part, and I'll tell you what it cost, and I'll tell you about the rock on the mantle, and why a hard old man who'd buried everybody keeps a stone from a trail where he found a thing he never meant to keep. I brought the rifle up. Not to my shoulder. There wasn't time for the shoulder, and a long gun at the hip is a liar's weapon, more bark than bite. But I brought it up level and I put it on the clean man's belly, and I thumbed the hammer back in that sound. That one sound, the click of a hammer in a quiet morning. That sound has ended more arguments in this country than all the words ever spoke. "Hands," I said. His stopped, drifting toward his coat, and it stopped, and I watched him do the arithmetic I'd already done, that at this range I could not miss, that his second man was wide on my left and would have to swing a gun across his own horse's neck to bear on me, that even if they killed me, I'd gut-shoot the lead man first, and gut-shot is a long, ugly way to die out here with no doctor inside 2 days' ride. "Easy," the clean man said. The smile was gone. "Easy, friend, no call for that." "You came to my home," I said, "to buy a child. There's every call for it. Tell your man to drop his gun belt off the far side of his horse. He does it slow with his left hand. He does it fast or with his right. I open you up and we all find out who's faster after. I want to tell you I was calm. I wasn't. My hands were rock steady. The war gives you that. Steady hands and a sick heart both. But inside I was a screaming thing because I knew that the cellar door was open behind me and a little girl was standing in it. And that if this went wrong she would see it, and worse. She would be alone again in 10 seconds with two men who traded in girls. The second man dropped his belt. It hit the dirt with that heavy particular sound. Now you, I told the clean one. Same way, left hand. He did it, slow. His eyes never left mine, and I'll give him this, he wasn't a coward, he was just a businessman who'd done the arithmetic and didn't like the sum. You're making an enemy, he said, easy, conversational, dropping his belt. The party I work for doesn't forget a debt. You think you're saving her. You're just buying her a longer wait. And here's the thing he didn't know. Here's the thing none of them ever know. Mister, I said, I have spent 6 years waiting on a grave. I'm the most patient man you will ever threaten. You go on back and tell your serious party that the Tolliver girl died on the Calico Trail 3 weeks back, of thirst, beside a dead mule, and the old fool who found her bones buried them and won't say where. That's the truth, and you tell it true. There's no girl here. There's no debt to settle. There's a dead child and a hole in the ground, and an old man with a rifle who'd be glad, you understand me, who would be purely glad of a reason. I let him see it, the cold thing, the thing the war put in. I don't show it to people because it scares me more than them, but I showed it to him, full, and I watched a man who trades in children look into the eyes of someone he believed would do it, and decide it wasn't worth his pay. She's dead, he said slowly, testing it, trying it on. She's dead, I agreed. Bury that with the rest of your business. They rode out. I stood in my yard with the rifle up until they were past the big rock, past the spring, gone down the draw and small and gone. I stood there a long time after. My arms had started to shake by then, the steadiness leaving all at once the way it does, the body collecting on the debt the moment passes. Then I turned around. Wren was standing in the cabin door. She'd heard all of it. The Tolliver girl died on the Calico Trail. There's a dead child and a hole in the ground. She'd heard me say she was dead, heard me build her a grave out of words and her face. I have to tell you about her face, because I thought, turning around, that I'd see fear. Or that worse thing, that flat weather report nothing she wore when she talked about her father. But that's not what was on her face. What was on her face, that I had said she was dead and meant it and made men believe it, what was on her face was this. She understood that I'd lied her out of the world that wanted her. That a man had stood in his own door and salted his own ground and called himself enemy to serious people, to keep her. That when her father had made her small and gone, it's easier for everybody. I had made her dead on purpose as a gift, so that she could be alive. She didn't run to me. She still wasn't built for running to people. We never fully fixed that, she and I've made peace with it. Some cracks you don't mend. You just build the house to lean the other way. But she crossed the yard, walked in those cut-down boots, slow and deliberate, and she stopped in front of me, and she reached into her pocket and took out the rock. The one I'd given her on the big rock. The one I'd told her was a true thing that doesn't leave. And she held it up to me, held it out. I didn't understand at first. I thought she was giving it back, and something in me lurched, thinking I'd lost her somehow, that she was returning the promise. Trade, she said. Trade what? You keep mine, she said. I keep yours. Then we both got one that won't leave. Then if one of us, she stopped. Started again, fierce the way she said the hard things. Then there's two of us holding, not just one. I have buried 3 men and a wife, and a horse I loved better than most people, and I never once cried doing it. I cried then, standing in my own yard with my arms still shaking and the smell of gun oil on my hands, an old, hard, ruined man. I cried like the snow coming off the high country, and I was not ashamed, and she watched me do it the way I'd watched her come back to life, careful, taking inventory, learning that grown men can break and not become weather, that you can break in front of a child and the breaking can be safe. Maybe that was a thing she needed to learn as bad as anything. Maybe it was the last lie of her father's I got to undo, that a man's feelings are a storm a child has to survive. I showed her they don't have to be. They can just be a thing two people stand in together. We traded. That's why her rock, the one she carried off the trail, the first true thing, the one she held through the ride and the broth in the dark, that's why it's on my mantle. Because we traded. I carry her trail rock. She carries the one I gave her on the big rock, two of us holding, not just one. That was 11 years ago. The serious party never came back. Maybe they believed it. Maybe a dead girl wasn't worth the ride. Maybe there's no debt so serious it outlives the man who ran from it, and somewhere out there Tolliver settled his own account in whatever country he found, and I have stopped wanting to ask him my one question. I know the answer now anyway. The lie a man tells himself to ride away is the same lie every time. It's easier for everybody, and it never is. It's only easier for the one riding. The everybody is just him, alone, telling himself he's a crowd. Wren's grown now. Stubborn as the day I found her, Lord, more so, she'd argue the sun down out of spite. She runs more of this place than I do. My knees gave out 2 winters back, and she does the high pasture, and she does it better than I ever did, sits a horse like she was poured onto it. She still hums that tune from her mother sometimes when she thinks she's alone, and I still don't ask about it, and that's ours, that silence, one of the good ones. She doesn't watch the trail anymore. Stopped years ago. I noticed the day she stopped and I didn't say anything, because some things you let a person do private. She just didn't climb the big rock one evening and didn't the next, and the watching she'd done for the man who wasn't coming had finally found a man who'd come and stayed, and she didn't need the watch. I asked her once last spring why she leaned into me that first time up on the rock, before she trusted me, before there was any reason to. She thought about it the way she thinks about everything, slow, getting it right. You didn't fix my stitch, she said. I didn't know what she meant. The latigo, she said, first week, I got it wrong 40 times and you let me. Everybody before you, they fixed it, took it out of my hands and fixed it and gave it back done. You let me get it wrong till I got it right. She shrugged and looked away, out at the country, the way I do. I figured a man who'd let me get something wrong 40 times wasn't in a hurry to be rid of me. Men who are leaving don't wait around for you to learn. She went back to her work. I sat with that a long while. All the things I did wrong that first year, and there were so many, I was no kind of father. I was a hard old man feeling his way in the dark. And the thing that reached her, the thing that built the whole house we've lived in since, was that I was too stubborn and too ignorant to fix a little girl's stitch. I keep her rock on the mantle. She keeps mine in her pocket. I've seen the worn place it's worn in all her coats, 2 of us holding. That's the whole story near enough. There's more, there always is. A life is just more and more, but that's the shape of it. How the loneliest man in the territory got himself a daughter he never asked for, what it cost, what it was worth. She came in just now, while I was telling you this. Saw me at the mantel with her rock in my hand. Didn't say anything. Just stood in the door the way she stood in it 11 years ago, except not afraid now, not small, just home. You crying again, old man, she said. I told her it was the elevation. She didn't believe me. She never has. She came and stood by me at the mantel and we looked at the rock. And outside the wind came down off the high snow, and somewhere a hawk went over, and I thought about all the trails in this world with somebody waiting at the end of them for a person who isn't coming, and how I'd had the dumb, blind luck to ride up one of them in time. Put it back, she said about the rock. You'll drop it. I put it back. She's right, I drop it. My hands aren't what they were. But hers are good. Strong and patient, and they don't flinch anymore, and when I'm gone, and that's coming, I'm old, I don't lie to myself about that the way her father lied to himself about the trail. When I'm gone, she'll have both rocks, hers and mine.